There are movies you love, and then there are movies that quietly wait for you, that sit on a shelf in your memory, patient, unhurried, until you've lived enough life to deserve them. Dead Poets Society is one of those movies. Most people describe it in the same way: inspiring, hopeful, Robin Williams at his most alive, a film about passion, poetry, nonconformity. Carpe Diem, seize the day. And all of that is true. But we think that interpretation lets the movie off the hook. Because Dead Poets Society is not, at its core, about following your dreams. It's about what happens when someone finally discovers who they truly are inside a world that has already decided who they must become. And that question doesn't resolve cleanly. It doesn't inspire you, it devastates you because of Neil Perry, a boy who, for one single night, was completely himself and couldn't survive going back. Neil's suicide still divides people who watch this movie. There's a version of this argument that goes, it's manipulative, a cinematic shortcut. The film kills a character to manufacture complexity it didn't earn through the story alone. In a lesser film, that would be all it is, a jump scare dressed as tragedy. And that argument deserves to be taken seriously, because there's a real question underneath it. Did Neil have other options? Could he have waited, talked to someone, survived military school, got into college, become an actor on his own terms? Logically, yes. Objectively, probably. But the movie isn't operating in logic. It's operating in emotional truth. And the terrifying thing about emotional truth is this: what you cannot imagine, you cannot survive. Neil doesn't die because he lacks options. He dies because he cannot see them. And that distinction is everything.
To understand why Neil dies, you have to understand what Keating is actually teaching. Because the film is often reduced to one bumper sticker: seize the day. But Keating's philosophy is far more dangerous than that. He's not telling these boys to be reckless. He's telling them to be conscious. There's that famous speech about medicine, law, business, engineering. All are noble pursuits. All are necessary. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. The film believes that completely. But here's the thing that the film also understands. The thing that makes Carpe Diem into something almost tragic. Welton Academy does not care about your inner life. Welton exists to manufacture outcomes, doctors, lawyers, men with futures already decided for them. The headmaster in the final scene asks what the class has been reading. Cameron answers, mostly the romantics. What about the realists? We skip that part. That exchange is not an accident. The film is quietly telling you something about Keating's method, and about what it costs. But we'll come back to that. Here's the uncomfortable truth the movie buries inside its admiration. Mr. Keating is a great leader, and he fails Neil Perry. Not maliciously, not negligently in any simple sense, but he fails him. Look at everything Keating does right. He knows his audience. He knows these boys are starving for permission to feel something real. He earns their trust, not through authority, but through investment. When Charlie Dalton pulls his telephone from God's stunt, Keating doesn't celebrate it. He rebukes him, quietly, firmly. There's a time for daring, and there's a time for caution, and a wise man understands which is called for. That's a great leader, willing to correct, willing to lose the room, to tell someone the truth they need to hear. In the Todd Anderson scene, the one that breaks every aspiring English teacher. Keating refuses to let Todd hide in his own smallness. "I think you're wrong. I think there's something inside of you that is worth a great deal." And out comes The Sweaty-Toothed Madman, one of the most honest poems ever pulled from a terrified person in the history of classroom cinema. But here's Keating's method distilled to its core. Don't think, just answer. Free up your mind. Say whatever comes, even if it's total gibberish. In the controlled safety of a classroom with a great teacher present, that method produces poetry. Applied by a 17-year-old alone in crisis with a father who has just sentenced him to military school, it produces a different result entirely. Keating opened every door in these boys' minds. He taught them to feel everything, but he never taught them how to evaluate what they felt, how to check an emotion against a principle, how to weigh passion against patience, how to survive in a world that will not always give what they now know they deserve. He taught them only the romantics. He skipped the realists. And for most of the boys, that's fine. Knox gets the girl, Todd finds his voice. But Neil needed both, and Keating only gave him one. People describe Neil as the boy who loved acting, but that's too small. Neil doesn't just love theater. Theater is the only place he becomes real. Watch how the film splits him in half. Around his friends, around Keating, he's warm, charismatic, alive. He's the one who rallies the group, the one who finds the cave, the one who says yes before anyone else dares to. But around his father, he collapses inward. He becomes careful, curated, smaller. There's a moment early in the film where his father, without asking, without hesitating, without a single conversation, simply tells Neil he will be dropping the school annual. He has decided. That's all. He's made the final decision. Neil says nothing, not because he has nothing to say, but because he has learned somewhere deep and early that saying it is pointless. This is not a boy who has never tried to communicate with his father. This is a boy who has already learned what communication with his father produces. Nothing.
Neil is cast as Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Not a coincidence. Puck is the spirit of transformation, mischief, pure uncontained freedom, the most liberated character in all of Shakespeare. And Neil, who has spent his entire life performing obedience, gets to play the one character who answers to no one. The performance scene is the emotional center of this film, and it works not because Neil is brilliant, though he is, but because of how the film frames him. Warm light, movement, energy, air. The frame opens up around him. Everything feels expansive. Now watch what happens immediately after. The car ride home with his father. Darkness, silence, compression. Neil looks physically trapped inside the frame, like a specimen in a box. That visual contrast is not accidental. That is the director telling you everything you need to know about what Neil's life actually feels like. There's a moment during the play where Neil sees his father in the audience. The first time you watch it, you think, oh no, he's been caught. But we think it means something entirely different. We think that's the moment Neil realizes this is the happiest he has ever been, and his father is right there to watch it. And it changes nothing. The play does not cause Neil's suicide. The play reveals to him what life could feel like. And once he knows that, returning to what came before becomes unbearable. You cannot unsee yourself.
There's one detail in the final sequence that reframes everything once you notice it. Neil comes home from the play. His father sentences him to military school. End of discussion. His mother weeps quietly in the background. And then, alone in his room, Neil takes off his crown, then his shirt. The scene feels almost ritualistic, like he's removing identities one at a time. The crown is a performance, Puck, the actor, the self he glimpsed. The shirt is expectation, student, son, future doctor. Underneath both of them, he's just a boy, exhausted, alone, unable to reconcile who he is with the life waiting for him. People say he died for art. We don't think that's right. He died because he saw himself clearly for the first time and understood with absolute certainty that the world he lived in would never allow that self to exist. That is a different, darker, sadder thing. Art didn't kill Neil Perry. The absence of any space for him to exist did. When the boys learn Neil is dead, they gather in the attic, and the scene that follows is one of the most honest arguments in film about education and responsibility. Cameron, who has always been peripheral to Keating's world, never fully converting, says what the administration will say. Mr. Keating put us up to all this crap. Let Keating fry. And Todd fires back. That is not true. He didn't put us up to anything. Neil loved acting. The film frames this as an us versus them moment. We are meant to be with Todd against Cameron, and emotionally, we are. But the film is doing something more sophisticated than it appears, because both of them are partially right. Neil's father is responsible. He is, without question, the proximate cause of his son's death. A man who saw his child as a future, not a person, who never once paused to ask, "Who is my son?" Who responded to art with military school, who could not see that his vision of love was to Neil suffocation. Keating is not responsible in the same way. He did not put Neil up to anything. Neil loved acting before Keating ever walked into a classroom, but Keating, the great leader, the genuine teacher, gave these boys gasoline and a match, and very little instruction on what to do when the world around them refused to burn the right things. He did not teach them how to evaluate their emotions, only how to feel them. He gave them the romantics. He skipped the realists. And for a boy like Neil, in a crisis like this one, that gap was fatal.
At the end of the film, after everything has fallen apart, after Neil is gone, after Keating is expelled from the school he gave everything to, he walks back into his old classroom to collect his things. The headmaster is teaching. The boys sit in their rows, obedient, orderly. The system has reasserted itself. And then Todd Anderson stands on his desk. "Oh, Captain, my Captain." Then another boy. Then another. Then most of them. People read that scene as triumph. We've always read it as grief. Because yes, Keating changed their lives. He opened doors in them that cannot be closed. That is real. That matters. But it was not enough to save Neil. And maybe that is the most honest thing the movie leaves us with. Art can awaken people. Poetry can change people. A teacher can alter the entire direction of a life. And sometimes it still isn't enough. Because inspiration alone cannot dismantle pressure. It cannot undo childhood. It cannot override a father who has already decided that his son's interior life is irrelevant to his son's future. Sometimes a single night of feeling completely yourself is enough to change a person permanently. And sometimes that change saves them. And sometimes it destroys them. And sometimes it destroys them. That's why we keep returning to Dead Poets Society. Not for the inspiration, not for Robin Williams, not even for Carpe Diem, but because it forces us to ask, what happens when a person finally discovers who they are, and the world refuses to let them be it? And because the answer the movie gives us is not the one we came in hoping for.